A blessed day to all of you. My dear sisters and brothers, a couple of weeks ago, you and I, together with the other members of the Cursillo, came together to discuss how we could together, as good Christians and responsible citizens, build up and create a culture for the common good. And because a number of days have passed by, it is possible that you remember some things and have forgotten other things. And so here we are to go over some of those salient features. From time to time, we ask ourselves this question: what is it that makes someone a good Catholic? We Christians, as we come together to the church, are taught this wisdom of how we could treat all humans in all of the society. Jesus also preached all the time about caring for the weak and the poor and the downtrodden. The church has, ever since its origins, been caring for the poor and has been fighting against slavery, eugenics, fascism, and communism. Love of neighbor is something that Jesus taught us all the time. And all this comes from the basis that you and I, like everyone else, has been fashioned in the image and likeness of God. And we are told that just as God is a relationship, that God is a family of persons, you and I, as human beings, are also social. And we are not here to compete with one another, but only to complete one another. And so, back to that question that we started with: how could we, as good Christians and responsible citizens, together create a culture for the common good? We have a term for it. We call it the Catholic social teachings. Now, there is a reality of sin. The reality of sin is that it is concrete, it is tangible, and it is not a simple thing like kicking a cat or pulling the tail of a dog. And sin is not merely an isolated individual act, but sin is something more. It can be communal, it can be in a community, in a country, in a culture. And that is why we ask ourselves this basic question: how could we, as good Christians and responsible citizens, together create a culture for the common good? The church has come up with what I'd like to call the 7 pillars of social justice, or we could also call them the 7 principles on which the social teaching of the church is based on. Let's see what they are and some of the implications that flow from it. The first is this: every human life has value and dignity, and therefore each of us has the duty to protect life and to preserve life and to promote it in all its stages. It is true that we take care of life from the womb to the tomb. But what happens to life in all its various forms? What happens to children that are engaged in child labor? What happens to the poor, the immigrant? What happens to the physically handicapped, those that are mentally challenged, the incarcerated, those that are condemned to die? Don't they have a value to their existence? Don't we have a duty to promote their life and their well-being? So let's ask ourselves how we can promote life in all its forms and all its stages. The second pillar is this. The most basic building block on which a human society flourishes is family. And that is why the church would call the family unit as a domicile church, as a local church, as a mini church. And how do we promote family life? Do we sit together and eat together? Do we stay together and pray together? And when one of us faces a challenge, do we as a family move together to support that individual? And of course, it is our families that form basic units like parishes, trade unions, social clubs, and charitable institutions. We need to promote families because families are the fundamental building block on which a society flourishes. The third pillar or the third principle is this. In every society, there are rights and responsibilities. Now, you can't imagine a society where people only enjoy rights. That would be anarchy, chaos, confusion, each one for oneself and God for all. And we cannot also think in terms of only responsibilities and no rights. That would become tyrannical. And so, how do we balance this rights and responsibilities, duties and privileges? That would be the third pillar. The fourth principle is what the church calls the option for the poor, the predilection for the poor. Jesus spoke of this all the time. Whatever you do to the least of these sisters and brothers, you do unto me. In fact, Matthew in 25 tells us that when we stand before the Son of Man who comes seated on the cloud, surrounded by angels, the one question that he is going to ask us is this: were you your brother's keeper? Were you your sister's keeper? Did you recognize me in those that you shared your life with? The option for the poor, the fourth principle. And the fifth is this: the dignity of human work and the rights of workers. Work is much more than just making a living. It is participating in the creative work of God and making a difference in the world and making the world a better place by our labor. And as we go about doing these works, we also have our own rights. And so, the dignity of human labor and the rights of human laborers is the fifth principle. And the question is, how do we treat laborers, workers? Do we respect their rights? And because we live in California and in our United States, there is also the issue of minimum labor. There is the issue of the immigrant who labors in our fields, in our homes, and in our factories. How do we treat them? We need to work for justice. And it is only when we work for justice that there will be peace in our society. The sixth pillar is what we would like to refer to as solidarity. It is not each one for oneself and God for all. None of us is an island. We are all one body. And so the joy of one is the joy of another. The pain of one is the pain of everyone. And so there needs to be this solidarity that flows from this compassion. And compassion actually comes from two Latin roots, which actually means to suffer with. And so, do we express this solidarity with those that are in a situation? Solidarity would be the sixth pillar. And the final and seventh pillar would be what we refer to as stewardship. We are not owners of creation. We are not lords of it. We are merely administrators. We are caretakers and stewards. And so, as we use nature, we also need to be mindful that we are respectful of nature. And so, the need to care for the environment, to take care of the surrounding, to leave the earth clean and green, to pass on a blue planet to our children and to our children. And that is possible only when there is care and reverence in our hearts for nature. And so, do we honor nature? Do we promote nature? Do we take care of nature? And so, these are the 7 pillars on which our Catholic social teaching actually rests on. And it is by walking each of these stages that we actually end up creating a culture for the common good. And so, may you and I, as good Christians and responsible citizens, work together with a sense of belonging and responsibility for creating a culture for the common good. May God bless us, and may He bring to completion the work of our hands. May God bless you.